One of the people who had Levi Yitzchak, as we're soon going to see in Biography, got smicha from, his name was Chaim Brisker. Chaim Brisker was one of the greatest giants 2 generations ago, in the time of the Rebbe Rashab, a little bit in the time of the Rebbe. And there's a story that one time his son walked into the Beis Medrash where his father was sitting and learning, all the people were sitting and learning those days. And he told his father that he became a chassid. Oh, it's very nice. And then the Chaim noticed how his son went over to his friends who were sitting there, and he told them all that he became a chassid. Also, they all rejoiced with him. And the Rebbe Chaim overheard how the son of his, this Bacher, is boasting in front of his friends that he got this massive naden, this dowry. We always talk 10,000 rubles when we talk about Russia, even though it could be $1. I'm not sure what that is. But let's say 10,000 rubles is a lot of money. And that he got a very big naden. Rebbe Chaim did not like that. He went over to the group and he tells his son in front of his friends, do you realize that the reason why you got a naden of 10,000 rubles is because you are Chaim's son? The son inherited also a little bit of seichel from his father too. So he answered back with derech eretz, and he tells his father, in other words, you're trying to tell me that you are worth only 10,000 rubles. So Reb Chaim answered back, my dear son, I am worth a couple of million rubles. The problem is that in this transaction you were involved, my value went down to 10,000. Out there's a concept which is called Yeridas HaTorah. As the generations go lower, everything goes lower. In Chassidus, it explains that although the generation packet goes lower and lower, because that's what we are called ikvis the Mashiach, we are called the heel of Mashiach. At the same time, when it comes to the Nasi of the generation, because the generation is lower, the Nasi has to be higher than the previous one. Because the previous one had a certain job. The lower the generation, the higher the job. And that's why the Yeridas HaTorah may be at the generation level, but not at the Nasi level. And we noticed something very interesting. Of course, in Chabad, you see it, especially because it's according to the Sfiras HaMalchus, although it's the last one, it is the top one. And we noticed something very interesting, that later, when the Sfarim of Levi Yitzchak actually were released from Russia in the late 60s, the early 70s, and the way that Rebbe started talking about his father's Sfarim, the Rebbe looked at it just like the Nesiach Chabad, and it's nothing less, and it's not in our hands to make higher and lower, but he definitely put it on the same level as the Rabbi. However, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak did have a little bit of a different guy, more on the Kabbalah way. There's a lot of stories, how the Rebbe Rashab asked him once about that, etc. But these are all Mipi Shmua. So what I wanted to do now is 2 basic things. One, to go through the biography of Levi Yitzchak, and another one to take one verse from Levi Yitzchak regarding the Yemai Stalkus, but obviously it's going to get something positive. Now, there's a massive difference between the biography of Levi Yitzchak and other biographies. Usually biographies were written by historians. A historian writes down a biography. The biography of Levi Yitzchak, as we say, you're not allowed to read it unless you say Birchas HaTorah, because this was written by the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is an exception. The Frierdiker Rebbe did not write any biographies of the other Rabbi. The Frierdiker Rebbe said a lot of stories of the Rabbi, and based on the stories of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that is how the biographies of the Rabbi were built, based on all the. But the Frierdiker Rebbe did not write down a biography of the Rabbi. The only one, at least that I know of, is the Rebbe Yitzchak. What happened was, the Rebbe Yitzchak passed away in the year Tavshin Dalet in 1944, in the summertime. The Frierdiker Rebbe in those few weeks was in Marsa, in the Aurora clinic, or whatever it was called. And the Rebbe used to come visit. That's what they say, at least. The Rebbe used to come visit him. And all of a sudden, the Frierdiker Rebbe noticed that the Rebbe did not come for a few days. Now, the Rebbe did not want the Frierdiker Rebbe to know that his father passed away, because otherwise, the Frierdiker Rebbe would have made the trip back to New York to B'Menachem Movel, the Rebbe. At least this is what I heard. So therefore, the Rebbe did not want it for the whole time the Frierdiker Rebbe should know. Once the Frierdiker Rebbe did find out about Levi, and I think that the Rebbe came, etc. So then the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter to the Rebbe, where a lot of the minhagim of Avelis that we have come from that letter. And then the Rebbe printed it in the back of one of the Mamorim, and then later it was printed in the Kodesh. Now, today, we don't necessarily do exactly how it is in that letter, because as time went on, the Rebbe got more information from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So therefore, although we have that letter, a lot of times people, when they, unfortunately, if someone is in Avelis, all of a sudden they see this letter and they see that we don't do exactly what it says in that letter. And the answer is known called Mishnah Rishayna and Mishnah Farbrengen. There's the first version and the second version. So therefore, we go according to eventually what the Rebbe told us later. Why did the Frierdiker Rebbe write a biography on a Levi Yitzchak? Because at that time, the Rebbe was giving out a journal. You know, anybody who has a company, anybody who's a party, if you don't have a newspaper, if you don't have public relations, if you don't have a website today, you're nothing. So when in Lubavitch, there was a journal that was called Ha'ah. Then later, in the time of the Frierdiker Rebbe, in the 1930s, there was a journal that was called the Hatamim. And this is what kept the Lubavitchers together, because there was no WhatsApp in those days. So you needed a place where people hear what's going on in other places, and they could share different ideas in Nikla, Sidis, in news, what's going on, in the Meistis, etc. Then they gave out 8 volumes of the Hatamim. By the way, while the whole Lubavitch between the 30s was in Poland, the Frierdiker Rebbe had left Russia in 1927, 27-28, and he moved to Poland, Riga. So although that were the stronghold of Lubavitch was, and that is where the Hatamim came out, the Rebbe at that time was in Germany and in Paris. The Frierdiker Rebbe made it very clear to the editors of the Hatamim that everything must be sent to the Rebbe. The Rebbe has to edit it, and then everything that the Rebbe edits, that could go back to Poland and be printed. Unfortunately, the Second World War broke out, so the next volume of Hatamim did not come out. When they came to America, so the Rebbe in 1943 started giving out what is called Kovetz Lubavitch. And that was sort of the newspaper that kept Lubavitch together. And the Rebbe wrote articles in there. They had civics from the Frierdiker Rebbe. They had news from Lubavitch all over the world. And that's what started putting Lubavitch on the map. For the second issue of Kovetz Lubavitch, that is where the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote this biography of Rabbi Yitzchak. So if you have the paper in front of you, go to the page that says on top, Harab Rabbi Yitzchak, Schneerson. We're just going to go through this very quickly. I'm going to say it basically in just a few words in Yiddish, but then basically in English. In number 10, 11, and 12, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes as follows: Donnerstag on Thursday, Chof Ches Menachem Lov. Imagine, those days there was no WhatsApps. Even telegrams were very scarce, because the Yitzchak was in Alma-Ata, which was today they have today we have WhatsApp, so we can see what's happening today in Alma-Ata. And they have these beautiful hotels and these everything. Those days, that's not what Alma-Ata looked like. And on Chof Ches Menachem Lov, in other words, 8 days after the Levi Yitzchak passed away, finally, is der Halten geworden zu Chasnit Venezian. Now, by the way, the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote this, but at that time, no one knew the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote this, because the Frierdiker Rebbe did not want people they should know that he wrote it, because he's talking a lot about the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe, so it shouldn't look as if he's talking about himself. Another thing, when the son-in-law of the Nasi is called Chasnit Venezian. Many times when you'll see the Rebbe's name before Tafshin Yud, before the Rebbe became Rebbe, you will see that his name is written with the Rosh Hashanah right after that, Chadvan. Ches Dalet Beis Nun. Chadvan stands for Chasnit Venezian, which means the son-in-law of the Nasi. So the Frierdiker Rebbe writes over here that on Chof Ches Av, Chasnit Venezian Harav, the Rebbe, received telegraphisch with a telegram the terrible news that his father, his great father, Rabbi Yitzchak Schneerson, I'm only by number 11, welches Nifter geworden Shabbos Chof Gimel Menachem. Believe it or not, in the telegram it said that Rabbi Yitzchak passed away on Chof Gimel. As you can see, there's a note on the bottom in number 2. Achar kach nisbar shehoya b'yom Chof Menachem. Later they found out that it wasn't Chof Menachem. It took a long time until the Rebbe found that out. Not only that, there's a letter from the Rebbe to the people in Israel that they should please ask people who were there by the fear of his father, and especially the Raskin family, etc., if his father passed away before Shkia or after Shkia, to know exactly which day. Which means even 5 years later, they still were not exactly sure when that date. But at least then, they thought it was Chof Gimel. And then you can see that Yitzchak Rebbe writes in a parenthesis, 2 lines after number 11, the day they passed away, we're not yet sure. In the city of Almaty, Kazakhstan, in Russia, and this Petira brought out a terrible impression by all the Kabbalah. Number 13. The Yitzchak Schneerson is given an Einikul. He was a grandson. The Tzemach Tzedek had 7 sons. The oldest one, his name was Rebbe Baruch Shalom. So the Rebbe's father comes from a straight lineage of the Rebbe Baruch Shalom. In other words, he was a 4th generation from the Tzemach Tzedek. Now, Rebbe Baruch Shalom, by the way, Rebbe Baruch Shalom saw the Alter Rebbe. When he was a little boy, he slept in the Alter Rebbe's room. He was 8 years old when the Alter Rebbe passed away. And that's why throughout his life, he was always a little bit more shcheda, like a little bit on the sadder side, because he witnessed the passing of the Alter Rebbe. There's a lot to talk about Rebbe Baruch Shalom. Okay, so he was an Einikul of Baruch Shalom. He was born Chai Nis by his father Baruch Shneir, who was a son-in-law of the great Chassid Zalman Chai. Number 14, from when he was young, Rabbi Yitzchak already showed exceptional talents, and he learned by the Farbrengen, Rabbi Yochaikin, etc. And then he became the son-in-law of Rabbi Shlomo Yanovsky, the father of the Rebbe Zakan. Number 17, Rabbi Yitzchak Schneerson of Bakum and Smicha, he received Smicha from the greatest Geonim of the generation, like Reb Chaim Brisker, Rebbe Chaim Eisels from Lodge. The Reb Chaim Brisker, there's a famous story that the Rebbe said many times, that when Reb Chaim Brisker had heard, the Rebbe says he tested him very hard. Now there's a letter from the Rebbe Rashab to Rebbe Yitzchak, where the Rebbe Rashab asked him to go and get Smicha from Reb Chaim Brisker. So this way he would be able to be accepted in bigger cities. And the Rebbe Yitzchak, of course, did that. And one of the questions that what Reb Chaim did, that the questions that came in to the Rebbe, he should answer. One of the questions was that there was a group of people who, those days, I know it's a very hot topic, but it's called the Erev Chatzeres, and they were all used a whole bunch of houses were using the same sukkah, and they forgot to do an Erev Chatzeres. So they're allowed to carry to the sukkah. Erev Chatzeres means that if, let's say, you're in an apartment building and there are Jews in the apartment building, although it's a closed-in area, you still need an Erev Chatzeres, which makes it as if all the apartments are like in one kitchen. So that's what Erev Chatzeres does. If you're in a hotel, so if you're the only Jew, it's one thing. If there are 2 Jews, then it becomes another issue. What happens if you're going for, I'm not giving a lot, I'm just giving a little example. Let's say you're going for a Shabbaton, there's 100 families. So if they're all eating in the same dining room, you don't need Erev Chatzeres. But if there are some people who make their own Shabbos in their own room, that can cause a little bit of an issue. So they asked over there, what happens if all these people forgot to make Erev Chatzeres? And Levi Yitzchak answered that in this case, you don't need an Erev Chatzeres because the sukkah is what puts them all together because they're all eating in the same place. And there's a lot of explanations from the Rebbe on that. Number 19, the Friedrich Rebbe writes that Levi Yitzchak was, besides for a big guy in Nikla, he was a special expert in Sifrei Kabbalah, and the Rebbe Rashab liked him very much. It says, look at number 19, by the way, a line under 19. It is given from the Chassidim and Fursamim by Lubavitch Rebbe Rashab. He was from the special Chassidim by the Rebbe Rashab, which you liked him very much. The Rebbe Rashab actually said this, that there are 3 Chassidim with whom he will be proud in Olam Hazeh and in Olam Haba. In the 3 are, the first one was Rebbe Yitzchak, the second one was Rebbe Mendel Chaim, the Radatz's son, And the third one was Reb Zalman Schneerson, who was known as Reb Zalman Lodger. If you ever heard of Rabbi Greenglass from Montreal, Rabbi Greenglass was a Talmud movement of Reb Zalman Lodger. Number 20 and 21, the Frierdiker Rebbe discussed over here the famous thing that the Rebbe said many times on Chai Nissen, which is the birthday of Rebbe Yitzchak, which is always on Chol HaMoed Pesach, which is also the day of the Rebbe's bris. There used to be a lot of times rallies for kids. So the Rebbe many times used to say the story how Rebbe Yitzchak was in charge of the matzahs that had to go to the soldiers, and how he even went to the top of the government to take care of it. But another very important thing is the end of paragraph, right before number 22, go to 21, 5 lines down. Wie euch in der Materialsammlung von der Verteidigung vom Beilis Avilas beim Prozess. There was a famous bloodline Beilis process. Rebbe Yitzchak was one of the people who was instrumental in gathering the information to be able to take care of that. And by the way, the Rebbe then was a young boy, but the Rebbe also gave a lot of the information. Number 22 and 23, the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about how there was a time when many refugees from Poland ended up in Yekaterinslav. It doesn't say numbers here, but I heard the number was 40,000. Imagine you have an influx of 40,000 people in Crown Heights, the refugees. That's what it was. And Rebbe Yitzchak and his wife were very much involved in that. I remember this was back in the year Tafshin Lamed Zayin, 1976, 77. The Beis Yisrael, the Gerer, the Al, 4 Gerer Rebbes ago. The Beis Yisrael passed away. In Ger, the minhag is that when a Rebbe passes away, they wait till after Shiva. After Shiva, if there's one person that they know he's going to be the Rebbe, so he becomes the Rebbe. Otherwise, the few candidates who are supposed to be the potential candidate, they get together in the room and they lock themselves up for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, and then they emerge and they say who's the next Rebbe. Then this was right before Purim Tafshin Lamed Zayin. Purim that year was on Friday, and the Rebbe Farbrengen on Shabbos afternoon. It was a beautiful Farbrengen. All Farbrengens are beautiful. Each Farbrengen has its uniqueness. And the Rebbe said then that he wanted to wish Mazel Tov to the new Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, and therefore now is an opportunity to discuss the relationship between Ger and Lubavitch. And one of the things that the Rebbe said, that he remembers as a little boy, that a lot of the refugees from Poland ended up in Katerinstadt. So the Rebbe said, I did not get involved too much in what's going on. But there was one thing that caught my eye, and that was that although many people came to the house, but there was this one person who Rebbe Yitzchak sat him at the table and he gave him a lot of covet. And the Rebbe says, I couldn't figure out exactly what he's saying because by Emak Shuru, the point they said, they say Buri, right? They don't say Baruch, right? So he's all Yiddish. So and then he went into the kitchen and he asked his mother, the Rebbe Tzachana, who is this person that giving such honor to? And the Rebbe Tzachana answered, thus the Rebbe Nachman Kaminer is a shvager of the Gerer. That he was a brother-in-law of the Gerer. So that was just one interesting point, what the Rebbe says over here about plating. And then in number 25, the Rebbe says, in the last few years, Rebbe Yitzchak was forced to Uizwandern, to wander, to go together with his family in a very far-flung place in Kazakhstan. And this had a very bad effect on him. That's where he passed away. You look at the bottom, there's a note number 4, all the way on the left on the bottom, by number 28. And the Rebbe explains over here, why is the Frierdiker Rebbe being so vague about it? Why did the Frierdiker Rebbe write? What happened? He was in prison, and that's what happened. He was exiled. So the Rebbe writes, Kenire, it seems like, that Dichtav Menusach Stomi said, that it's written vague expressions, and the same thing when it comes in the last few years, when it comes to the concept of Yiddishkeit. Why? Because at the time when this was being printed, the Rebbe Tzachana was still in Russia. The Russians knew exactly what goes on in 77. And they saw everything which is printed in 77. And all they needed to be able to see that the Frierdiker Rebbe is writing, telling the whole world what happened to Rebbe Yitzchak, that he ended up in jail, etc. And that could be a very big problem for the Rebbe Tzacham. As we all know, that the Rebbe was always against all these propaganda and all these protests that he used to make for Russian Jewry, because every time you make a protest here, another Jew in Russia or Jews end up in jail, lose their jobs, etc. So therefore, the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote it in a very cryptic, vague way. And then the Rebbe finishes off that Rebbe Yitzchak left over many ksavim, many writings, manuscripts in Nigla and Kabbalah. Chaval al de'avdi b'lei mishtakin. This expression, mother that was a shad on those that are lost, and we cannot find any more people like this. This is the basic biography that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote. On the other side of the page, we're not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to show what this is. When the manuscripts of Rebbe Yitzchak ended up by the Rebbe, there was a page, as you can see on the right-hand side, it's a manuscript. This is a manuscript of the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father, while he was in exile with no sfarim whatsoever and tortured, etc., finally, after he was sort of released to Al Matam, which was 4.5 years after he was jailed, he wrote this Rishima. And he basically wrote Al Pi Kabbalah. Why did he have to go through all of this? Let's go to the top of the page. Ani Levi Yitzchak ben Zelderahu. I, Levi Yitzchak, the son of Zelderahu. Higalti al Meshach Shanim. I went to Golis for 5 years. Lemasa Chile b'Medinas Kazakhstan. First, Levi Yitzchak ended up in Chile. From there, he went to Almata. But where he was exiled was in Chile, which was a terrible place. It was full of mosquitoes and actually he said it was only goyim and they didn't have a place, but it was terrible, terrible, terrible. So it was in Chile, Kazakhstan, Umeyhem, and from those, from the beginning that I was exiled, I sat in jail, min testnis and test, holding the third line, number 2, from testnisten ad tu bishvat shnas hetavshin, from Tesnissen until the following year on Tu B'Shvat. Now, parentheses, right? Altogether, Bechamisha Beis Asurim, in 5 jails. B'Tchila b'Nefesh Petros, first in Pietro Petros. B'Chakach b'Kir, then in Kir. B'Chakach Oidapam b'Nefesh Petros, then a third place again in Nefesh Petros. B'Chakach b'Kharkov, B'Chakach b'Almata. So I was in 5 different jails. Hainu Meshech Shin Gimel Yomin K'Mispashto. For 303 days, he was in jail. Now, when did they tell me, which is the Enkivader of the SSR of Russia? When did they tell me my verdict? On later towards the morning, when I was in jail in the city of Dnepropetrovsk. And that's what they told me on a Shana Rabbah that I'm going to go to exile for 5 years. Says Rebbe Yitzchak, we're moving. It is self-understood. I'm holding across number 4. That this is Hashgacha Pratis from above. I'll call Chatoisav Abenesav Troy Murubim. Imagine Rebbe Yitzchak writing this. This is the Brohomai. I don't want to translate it. This should be atonement for me. Hashem Atay, the Rebbe, the good Almighty, Asher Lekol Urachamov, that he has plenty of mercy. Yerachim Olay Val Nebeis B'Tei Klal Yisrael B'Schus Habeisa Akdoshim Nishmosei that he's going to in schus of my ancestor who be Meheiro Yetzieni Min HaMetzah Mecha and quickly should take me out from this confinement to freedom. V'Yeshiveni LeBeisi should bring me back to my home. I will the Ishti L'Zari Yichit to my wife and my children. The whole page over here, which we are not going to do tonight, Rebbe Yitzchak explains Al Pi Kabbalah. Why did he have to go to 5 jails, and why in this place, and why the third jail was like the first, but in the same city, but not the same jail, and why did he have to be for 303 days, etc. And why did he have to get the verdict on a Shana Rabbah, and why the Shmeiras HaPoiker? And what does it have to do with the fact that his name is Levi Yitzchak and the fact that his mother is Zelda Rachel, etc., etc. Now, the Rebbe discussed this on Chof a lot of these details. And throughout the years, we discussed many more of these details. But obviously, we're not going to be doing that now. I'm going to do something a little bit different, which is very geschmack line of Rebbe Yitzchak. And that is as follows. What? What? Forgiveness. Yeah. No, yeah. I always like to blame somebody else. But we should be safe to have Rabbi Yitzchak tonight can give us this. Not although as by now you've met most of you know I have the great source of being named after. But we'd like to have the original. Everybody knows that Lubavitchers have a problem with these talkas of Yitzchak. For some reason, they don't know how to act. Rebbe passed away. Rebbe doesn't pass away. Rebbe doesn't pass away. Is this something which is a feeling? Is this something which is a reality? Is this something which is based on Torah? Where does it come from? The answer is that Levi Yitzchak is the answer to all these questions. Thank you. But Levi Yitzchak this over here is Lekut Levi Yitzchak, is one of the volumes. It has Lekutim al Tanakh Mamoreh Chazal, some certain Gemaras. The Levi Yitzchak could take a Gemara of 5 lines and write 30 pages on it, literally. And over there you'll have Nigler, Siddur, Kabbalah, Ma'aseh B'Torah, Truth Shalvikra, the deepest concepts. And by Levi Yitzchak, how to say it? There was once one of the big Garelik of this generation passed away about 20 years ago. His name was the Chaim Zimmerman. There's a very famous story how he came to the Rebbe, and he was so impressed by the Rebbe, but he was on the sugar type. He was wild. It was our average people couldn't. The Rebbe always just say how when he came to the Rebbe and he listened to the conversation. But one of the things that he said was, just to give a little idea, that the Bochrim asked him that he should describe to them the Rebbe. What does he see the godless of the Rebbe? She said, I'm going to tell you, and you won't understand what he's going to be telling you. So they said, anyways, tell us what you know that. So he said that the Rebbe is like the Rambam. So they asked him, what do you mean is like the Rambam? She said, I told you won't understand. Anyways, he said like this. By the Rambam, you see something very interesting. Any Rosh Yeshiva, they give a shir. What's the shir? Gemara and another Rambam. What's the shir on the Rambam? You find a stir in Rambam, you find a contradiction, and then you show how it's not a contradiction. Comes the question, how could there be so many contradictions and then they're not contradictions? How does that happen? And the answer is, that's the way he put it, that when you start, here's one subject, here's another subject, write a whole bunch of subjects. You start working on the subject, you go, and finally, in Torah, everything comes back to one point. So when you start off, there may be some contradictions. But as you go to the point, everything starts making sense. As long as you get that point. So that's why the Rambam moved the point of Torah, and therefore everything pointed there. So although in the process you may find some stirs, but as you get to the point, everything is fine. So he said the Rebbe has 3 points, the whole Shas. I don't know what those points are, but he has the points, and that's why for him everything is so clear. The Levi Yitzchak, he did not look in Torah that the Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, Kabbalah, that it's all different tracks. No. To him, the whole Torah, to a certain extent, the Rebbe explained that also on the Ragachover. Why the Ragachover was so clear in Torah? Because he had points that everything pointed to. There's a lot to talk about. Anyways, so in this Lekut Levi Yitzchak, you have the second section is called Igros Kodesh, letters. There's dozens of letters that Rabbi Yitzchak wrote to the Rebbe, very big letters, and where he explains different subjects. One of the letters is regarding Chof Dalet tapes. The Alter Rebbe was the first Rebbe in history. Before the Alter Rebbe, there was no such thing as a Rebbe. Rebbe, Reish Ben Yisrael, with Alter Rebbe explained it in time. The Baal Shem Tov wasn't a Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov had Talmidim, the Chevrai Kadisha. The Magid had Talmidim, right? Talmidei have Hashem, Talmidei have Magid. They're not the Chassidim of the Magid. The first one with Rebbe Chassid relationship was the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was the first Rebbe. So therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak, by the way, in the Frierdiker Rebbe, whenever it says the Rebbe, who is that? The Alter Rebbe. That's the club. So Rabbi Yitzchak asks a question regarding Kabbalah Tables. He says, Kabbalah Tables is the day that Alter Rebbe passed away. He asked the question, why the Histalkus, the day of Histalkus of a tzaddik, and he says the Lashon of the tzaddikim hagdolim b'yosef, of the greatest tzaddikim. Who are the tzaddikim hagdolim b'yosef? Those who are megale rozet Torah, those who reveal secrets of Torah. Why is there Yom Histalkus called Yom HaHilula? Right? What's Hilula? What's the translation of the word Hilula? A wedding. A wedding, at least here in America, things are all different. But in Torah, in Yiddishkeit, the day of the wedding is the happiest day of a person in his life. That's how it works, right? Yom HaHilula. That's what we say, etc. So why, by the tzaddikim hagdolim b'yosef, we call the Yom HaHistalkus Yom HaHilula? Who is the first one that his Yom HaHistalkus is called Yom HaHilula? Rabbi was the first one with Megal Rozetated, and it's called Yom HaHilula. The question is why? Ask any kid, any child that goes to a school, which is the nicest day of the year in school? Which is the nicest day? Like when you go to school, to go to the park, right? It doesn't make sense. That's Yom Simchos Shel Rabbi, going to the park, right? We're not going to discuss on the part, but the point is that we see that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked that his day of his talmud should be called Yom Simchos. And the Rebbe Yitzchak says, and that's what we see that by all the tzaddikim hagdolim b'yosef, which are Megal Rozet Torah, it's called Yom HaHilula. By the way, the Rebbe writes in Chof Beis Shvat, in a Ha'ara, the Rebbe writes the concept of Yom HaHilula of the Rebbe, which if we'll have a few minutes, we'll discuss that. Anyways, so the Rebbe Yitzchak, and he asks that question regarding the Alter Rebbe on Chof Daled text. So he answers as follows. What? And he answers as follows. By Rabbi, when is the day of his talmud of Rabbi? When did he pass away? Lag, right? Somebody says Chayiyah, right? But nobody says that. Usually we say, when is it supposed to be? Lag, right? Lag became Lag. You know, by the way, how do we say that? Ayem, Shlosh Mien, Shehein, Kamisha words, Loim. Lag, we say Lag, Loim. When is it Lag Loim? There's a lot of answers. But the Pshuta Shel Mikra answer is because Lag Loim is the Gematria Moshe. And Rabbi was the Moshe of Primus Atay. Moshe Rabbeinu. Nicholas, whatever, just again. Okay, so but the point we call the Lag Loim. Why? When is the Rebbe Marash's birthday? Beis. Which day in the Omer? Which day is that? Which day? What? How many people know that? Okay, so you see that there are some people where you stress the concept of Omer, but that's only by Rabbi, right? By other people, you know. Why do you stress Lag Omer? Says the Rebbe's father, because Lag is the key to the answer why it's called the American. Watch this. Why did he say it should be because? Why? Passed away. The person passed away. But he's dead. The answer is because by an average person, when a person passes away, it's the end, you know, people sort of they know, but Hashem, who knows, the Mashiach is going to come and do this. But right now, it's over. What does he see? That now his neshama finished his job. Now he's going back to Bechad Katiris Katan, gets connected to the Eibishter, and now it's just another step towards Chiyas HaMeisim, and he'll be able to do all the rest. So the concept of Misa sort of switches to the real Chaim That's basically what happens. How does that work? Says Rabbi Yitzchak, where do we find in history that by Yidden, all the Yidden were supposed to get killed, and it was switched from Misa to Chai? What? Purim. What was supposed to happen? Was supposed to be killed at Nar, Radzokin, Taf, and Moshe, everybody. Who switched it? The Megillah is called Megillah Esther. Mordechai is right? Megillah Esther. What did Esther do? She went to Achashverosh. Now, did she want to go to Achashverosh in the beginning? No, she was afraid. Why? Because she might get killed, right? Because whoever goes to the king and is not called, Achas Dostoi, the homies. There's one law. You get killed, right? So the Poyol, the Mordechai told her, if you're not going to go, so she went. Now let's make a chesed. Why was it so important to tell Mordechai how many days wasn't she called to the king? I wasn't called to the king already. How much? And it was 60 days. Who cares? Vice she was trying to say something. 30 days. How many days did she say, let's daven and pray and fast? So she went, on the 33rd day, that is when it was switched from Mr. to Chaim. How do you switch from Mr. to Chaim? What? How do you switch from Mr. to Chaim? Here's the word, lehamis, right? Now in Hebrew, to get killed is sheyumas. What was he saying with lehamis? You take the word lehamis and you take out the two letters. I usually need a blackboard for this. When you learn the Kutz Levi Yitzchak, that's what you need. You take out the two letters, mace, mem, sub. What are you left with? Lehi. What's lehi? What? Let's figure out what lehi is. The Eibishter has many names, but the two basic names of the Eibishter are Shem Havaya and Shem Elikim. What is the difference between Havaya and Elikim? Very simple. Very simple. Havaya is Lamayla Mateva and Elikim is Teva, right? Bereshis Bara, Elikim. So we have a concept of death and we have a concept of life. You know, a lot of people ask, is there life after death? What's the answer? That's not a question. Life is always here. There's no such thing as life after death. You know, I'm sorry for you're going a little off track, but see this? When you walk in the street and you see somebody like this, why? Because he has a dead phone, right? What happens when the phone goes dead? You have to recharge it and it becomes back alive, right? Electricity is always there. Life is always there. This is a dead object. You put in life, it becomes alive. You take out the life, it's back there. But life is always there. There's no such thing as life after death. A body is a dead object. When the Rebbe hacks that on life, it's alive. The Rebbe takes out the life, is dead. When Mashiach is going to come, it's all going to be interconnected. That's how it's going to be. So the concept of death comes from the Shem Elokim. The concept of eternal life is from above. How do we switch from Elokim to life? Watch this. There are two names that the Rebbe has many names. One of them is Shem Elokim. There's another name which I don't know if you ever heard, but the Rebbe Levi brings it a lot. Is the name Achadatam. Achadatam is the name that switches from Elokim, from death, to the concept of the opposite. For example, I'm going to explain in a minute. In Chassidus, there's a concept which is called Hamtokas HaGvuras. You have Gvura, but you have to take some time. You have to soften the Gvura, right? How do you soften it? So let's say you have a big pot, making a soup, right? But you forgot to put in one item. That is salt. You taste the soup, it's garnished. Then you have salt. You ever tried to taste salt? Bitter like anything. All of a sudden, you take the salt and you hack it around in the soup. Oh, now the soup has some normal taste. We took Hamtokas HaGvuras. We took something which is like salt, and we put it into the pot, and now everything tastes better. Alberas the Elokim is the concept of Gvura. And we switch it to Achadatam. Do you see any correlation between these two names? The what? The letters before. If you look at Aleph, there's no letter before the Aleph, so it stays on Aleph. The Lamed, letter before is a Chof. The Hey, the letter before is a Dalet. The Yud, the letter before is a Tes. The Mem, the letter before is a Mem. There's a Shlosh Mem before comes a regular. So which are the letters that really get switched? The middle three letters. What are the middle three letters? The middle three letters are Lehi, get switched to Chadat. So far so good? Lehi, get switched to Chadat. Lehi, Lamed, Hey, Yud, Lamed, 30, Hey is 5, Yud is 10, the total of 45. We got to switch that. What do we switch it to? Chof, which is 20, Dalet is 4, Tes 9. 20 plus 4 plus 9 equals 33. In other words, we took the Lehi, Lehomis, Lehi, and we switched the Lehimes to Chadat. And now we understand why she went on the 33rd day, because Chadat is 33. 33 switches the 45, right? Watch this. What's the story of Purim called? The story, what is it called? Megillah. In the Siddur, it's called Baruch Hashem Hashem Tzivanu Al Mikra Megillah, not Megillah says. Megillah, because the ladies want to say that in Megillah says. We just say Megillah, so let's make it quality. Yeah, you heard the last year, 2 years ago in the White House, how that the Reform Rabbi lady said the bracha on the United, no? Yeah, anyways. Okay, so here's the story of Purim. Yeah, Megillah. Now, people spell it Men, Gimel, Yud, Lamed, Hey. The Lubavitchers don't do that. Because we go according to the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, the Siddur, by the what? Okay. You look, the Alter Rebbe spells it Megillah. Mem, Gimel, Lamed, Hey. Give a look. What are the two outside letters? Mem, Hey. Lehi, 45. What are the inside letters? Lamed, Gimel. The outside of the story of Purim, the Yidden are all going to get killed. The previous of the story all of a sudden goes, no, things are going to change. Okay, so you see how this is all intercorrelated into the concept of Lamed Gimel and 45. So therefore comes Levi Yitzchak and says that what is the idea of the Yom HaHilula switching from Misa to Chaim, from Lehi to Chadat. Okay, we're not done yet. You want to go home, you could, but it's not going to take us much longer. That's why getting back to the Alter Rebbe. You see the Alter Rebbe here anywhere? Oh, okay. What I just said now is 4 lines from a 10-page letter. Okay, so if you want, we can go through the whole letter. Okay, but we'll have to be here until Erev Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so I think we're going to, I'm just going to finish off just 2-3 interesting points. So somebody's going to say, wait, very nice, Alter Rebbe, that. What does that have to do with the story with Esther, with Purim? To make a long story short, I'll just say one more point from that letter, just to see the connection. Esther had 2 names. Esther Hadassah, that was her name. But Esther was called Esther Hamalka, right? Esther Hamalka. Esther was her Jewish name. Hamalka is what she was a queen over non-Jewish countries. The Alter Rebbe had 2 names, Shneir and Zalman, right? Shneir is his Hebrew name. Zalman is Alosh Laz from Solomon, etc. The connection of Esther to Shneir is another whole thing of the Kabbalah, but the Zalman and Malka, that goes right together because she was a queen on how many countries? 127. The gematria of Zalman is 7. Okay, so and then sort of Levi goes on and on and on to show the connection. So to him, it wasn't the story of Purim, or Dalteret, the Rabbi. It's all one Torah, but it's all interconnected. So now we understand the idea of Lamed Gimel. of why this Lamed Gimel is so important to when we want to explain the concept of the Heter of this. We want to add something to it, which of course the Levi doesn't say it, but it's Varsak in the eye. Did anybody hear of a mitzvah of the Rebbe, which is called Mitzvah Yom Levis? When did the Rebbe start Mitzvah Yom Levis? Which year? The Rebbe passed away. Next birthday of the Rebbe, the Rebbe started a Mitzvah Yom Levis. Now let's analyze this for a moment. Celebrating someone's birthday after the person passed away. Now, well, I don't think there are too many people in the world that continue celebrating the birthday of a person after he passes away. Lubavitchers, yeah, they're nuts. But I'm talking about normal people. Normal people don't do that, right? We still celebrate Rosh Chodesh Kislev. The Rebbe came home, right? It's after Gimel Tammuz. We still continue, right? Okay, but we're not going to get into that. To celebrate a birthday after someone passes away, that's a pistol mother. But here was more money. If the Rebbe was doing every year on the Rebbe's birthday a Farbrengen, and he continued that to Chof, all right. The problem over here is that the Rebbe started after the Rebbe passed away. That's when he started her birthday. Give a look, you find something very interesting. The Rebbe passed away Chof. 3 weeks later was Zainot. What did the Rebbe speak of that Zainot? And this year's Zainot, Tafshin Mem Ches, what? 3,300 years from then. 3,300. What's 3,300? Says the Rebbe, look at my father's letter. This letter over here, what's the number 33? What's the concept of number 33? Switching Misatacham. Therefore, the first birthday of the Rebbe comes, the Rebbe says, we're going to rejuvenate everything. And if you give a look, every year, 33 days. Which is Zainot, but we're not going to get into that. Okay? So now at least we see why these Lubavitchers Mishigoyim cannot relate to the concept of Extalus. Because in our doctrine, it just doesn't fit with the system of Torah. And Rebbe Yitzchak put this very clear already by the Alter Rebbe. By the Alter Rebbe, Chof Dalet Tevis. This is where he put it down clear that this is how we deal with it. So therefore, that the Rebbe should help, that we should be zeicher tonight to have the Torah Chadosha Miti Tetzei, and we should be able to see with our own eyes how all these things are coming to our Poyel Mamish. And if you have a few moments tomorrow to take out Levi Yitzchak, take out a few lines that Rebbe wrote clearly that this is not that they have this in English. You follow it? Take it by yourself, with your family. Take any of these lines over here. They're written very, very easily. And Be'ezet Hashem, we will be reunited, where we'll be able to see that the Stalkus is Nishki Stalkus. It's a Hepet from Misa to Kain, and we're going to be able to be reunited with Levi Yitzchak and our Rabbi in the Beis Hamikdash.